Welcome to our forum. Thank you so much for joining us. The forum today expressing aloha laina by embracing cultural heritage and place-based knowledge and contemporary ecosystem-based management. Kind of a mouthful, but we have a wonderful panel for you today that's going to illuminate this topic. Briefly, I just want to set a little bit of context. My name is Aaliyah Herman. I was born and raised on Oahu and was fortunate enough to return home 2 years ago to join the Department of Land and Natural Resources as the state co-manager of the Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary. And as many of you may know, the sanctuary was established in 1992 to protect humpback whales and their habitat. But there's another piece that was part of that, and at that time, one of the four main purposes was also in the future to consider adding additional resources and ecosystems of national significance. And so that's been this underlying thread in the past 20 years of what is the sanctuary and what should the sanctuary be in the future. Additionally, there was also a clause that said it's important that we look at ensuring multiple uses. This is something that's really unique to all sanctuaries. Sanctuaries are about protecting resources, but they're also about facilitating multiple uses. And in Hawaii, what that also means is traditional cultural practices. And so again, that has been this underlying theme over the past 20 years. Additionally, what's really unique about sanctuaries, and this sanctuary in particular, is that it's co-managed. It's a joint partnership between the federal government through NOAA and the state of Hawaii through the DLNR. And so we have this joint partnership between the state and federal government working to manage, right now, humpback whales and their habitat, but looking in this longer view of what could we be in the future? What is best for Hawaii? What makes sense for Hawaii right now? And since its inception, this theme, as I mentioned, has been ongoing, and we've seen support actually from all three governors, from Governor Cayetano, Governor Lingle, and Governor Abercrombie, to look at this new model for management. And we also see now at DLNR what makes sense. What makes sense for Hawaii? Is it a single species sanctuary? Is that the way forward, or is it something that that's truly a Hawaiian sanctuary, that looks at the integration of land and sea, that brings communities to the forefront? And that's another unique feature of sanctuaries. It's about communities, it's about place-based management, it's about addressing what's unique here in Hawaii to each island and to each community. And part of this process, so in 2010, we actually began what's required is a management plan review. So we looked at this management plan, we looked at the sanctuary and said, again, what makes sense now? And this has been an extensive process of community engagement, evaluation of scientific information, and we worked really closely with our Sanctuary Advisory Council, which is a body of 52 members made up of stakeholders from across the state, island representatives, as well as federal and state agency representatives. And we're fortunate to have two members here today. And this Sanctuary Advisory Council, our system of community-based advisors, has been really instrumental in framing our thinking as we move forward and consider this new framework of ecosystem-based management, of protecting Hawaii's biocultural resources, our natural and cultural resources in our marine environment. And one of the key architects of our new vision that we have here today is Dr. Kehau Watson, and she was instrumental in helping us convene a workshop about a year ago now that looked at how do we bring together Western scientific knowledge and traditional cultural knowledge and use that as a way forward, working closely with communities to actually manage adaptively here in Hawaii. And so with that, I will turn this over to Kehau to talk a little bit more about the framework that came out of this workshop and the way we might actually implement that in the sanctuary moving forward. Kehau.
Good morning, everybody. So this panel is actually a part 2 of a panel we had last year. And just so kind of I have some sense of who was here last year, how many of you were here last year for the panel? Yay, like 4 of you. Okay, so, but I saw Sarah Corbis shoot her hand up first. Okay, so a little bit more context, so we won't rehash the hour from last year. Originally when I came, really who started culture as an important seed on the Humpback Whale Sanctuary Advisory Council was Uncle Charlie Maxwell. This really, when it first started 20 years ago, this was this tremendous passion of his. And it was sort of through Uncle Charlie that I kind of got roped into this backwards or falling forwards. And when I came onto the advisory council years ago at this point, it's a blur, I was the only Native Hawaiian. But those of you who may or may not know me, I'm mouthy and kind of a pain in the ass. So, all the people who know me just laugh. It was really, I was determined to really make this a sanctuary that was a Hawaiian sanctuary. It started then, Sharon Pomeroy, who was from Kauai and a wonderful practitioner, then joined. Then Uncle Walter, Saul Kaho'ohalahala, Kimokeo Kapahulehua. There were a number of Native Hawaiians that came into the mix. And we made a very intentional decision. It's fairly early in the process. Malia can talk about how the head of the National Sanctuary Program came and offered me the opportunity to have my own entirely separate Hawaiian Advisory Council. And while that seemed like a wonderful opportunity, I also had the fortune of being able to discuss with other entities and protected areas across the country and internationally that had attempted that. And in my opinion, so if this doesn't work, everybody can blame me, and apparently it's on tape now, I really felt like we needed to integrate, that we needed to not split apart, but rather force Hawaiians and non-Hawaiians to work together to manage the places and protected areas that we shared. So we stuck it out together. So Uncle Walter and others don't sit as Native Hawaiian seats, they sit as constituency seats. Uncle Walter represents Molokai, Saul represents Lanai, Kimokeo is tourism, Sharon was Kauai, and so on and so forth. So simultaneously to this, there were thousands of comments received in the management plan scoping process that talked about culture as a priority. Therefore, at one of our meetings, we made a Native Hawaiian cultural working group, started with that. That working group then came out with management recommendations. Those recommendations led to this workshop we held. This workshop was small. It was a number of hand-picked, select experts in both the fields of conservation and Hawaiian culture. And we did that on purpose because we had very specific data gaps we had to fill. We had very specific questions as experts we had to answer. When you're talking about integrating culture, what does that mean? What does this look like? What is a Hawaiian research perspective? What is a Hawaiian education method? So we were very, very fortunate to have wonderful, about 20, Malia, 20? I'm making it up, 20 people, including Ula Leah, who has her head down and is trying to hide in the corner. But she was there amongst a number of others who came together and had a very interesting and dynamic and open and challenging 2 days where we discussed the realities and the challenges of what it means for these two perspectives to exist and work in the same place. So that's where we were last year when we did this panel. We then came out with a document. That document was then circulated to the the technical expert group. It then went out to what was the newly formed Native Hawaiian subcommittee. It then went out larger for community review. And then it went to the full Sanctuary Advisory Council where it was unanimously supported, which I think was like the only unanimous decision we have in I don't know how long. So 52 members endorsed it, which was a fairly extraordinary achievement, I believe. Since then, it has had wonderful far-reaching implications. It's been picked up in various forums nationally as a mechanism or a model of how you can work between indigenous groups and Western groups. It has, and I'll have Malia talk a little bit more about the ways certain things have been picked up very specifically by the management plan. So for the management plan coming out, culture is not this separate thing, but culture is the foundation of the management plan itself, because it is a Hawaiian sanctuary. It's Hawaiian waters, it impacts Hawaiian people, it impacts the Hawaiian culture, and I think we've done a fairly extraordinary job in really, for the first time, making the core of it this understanding that is organic to this place. And then also, just as it so happens, even internationally, it's been picked up. So I head to, where am I going? The Solomon Islands, Fiji, and Western Samoa to do cultural audits of their marine protected areas in the next 2 months. So I think what we've seen, this little thing, that sort of started really as a little thing, but something that where we've repeatedly engaged the community. I think this would never have worked if we didn't have community, if we didn't have an awesome cultural practitioner running DLNR, if we didn't have sort of these stars aligned for people who really understood that Hawaiian culture was not this box to check off or this separate thing to do, but this knowledge system to engage because it made management, research, and education better, none of this would have happened. So I think that's that.
Okay.
So our next speaker is the chair, our honorable chairman of DLNR, William Ella Jr.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. I don't know about honorable. I'm just trying to do what's right. With regards to the importance of the state as a co-manager in this process, as was previously said, because the monument is in the sanctuary is in the state of Hawaii, and it is built upon Hawaiian values. Of course, Hawaiian culture and Hawaiian traditional knowledge has to be built into the process. What does that mean? There are many, many Hawaiians around the table here, and it means many, many different things to the many, many Hawaiians that come with different stories, that come with different values, that come from a specific point of view with regards to where they are in their life at this particular time, where their family is in its evolution, if you will, trying to straddle the fence and with feet in both worlds. The process as we go forward is one that's going to have to be continually refining and adapting and making room for all of those discussions that go forward. There's some basic premise though. The premise in a Hawaiian method of management is one that the resource is there not only to be used, the resource is there to be respected. The resource is there to be cared for. The resource is there as a family member, and as a family member, you wouldn't use up all of its mana, if you will. And the resource is something that is supposed to be handed off to the next generation or the generation after that in as good a shape or better. So this premise about the current process where we're at with regards to a single species sanctuary evolving into a ecosystem-based sanctuary is something that, for whatever reason, I don't know, it scares a lot of people. You're coming from a Hawaiian perspective, it's not scary at all, it's how it's supposed to be. The single species sanctuary was something that is an artifact of history, it's an artifact of politics, it's an artifact of the conditions that occurred at the time of the creation, but as we know from a Western perspective and as we know from a Hawaiian culture's perspective, nothing remains the same. It evolves. In fact, the task in terms of the sanctuary and this management process going forward is so huge that it's going to take everyone. It's going to take the state, it's going to take National Marine Sanctuaries folks, it's going to take communities, it's going to take government agencies to figure out what our parts in this process is going forward. But the goal is the same, right? The goal is to hand off the resources in as good a shape or better than we found them. And I can tell you that the generation that preceded me, or us, in the case of Uncle Walter and myself, because we were having discussion earlier, quite frankly, didn't do it. And because they didn't do it, we have to work twice as hard to get it back on track. Walter and I were having a discussion as we began this process, and he asked me how I was doing. I said, well, I'm hanging in there. And Walter said, well, you got to be tough. And I explained to Walter that when you're Hawaiian, it's more than just being tough. It's taking a look at processes, it's taking a look at responsibilities, kuleana, and understanding that this is not a 2-year plan. It's not a budget that's based on the legislative biennium budget process to be followed by a supplemental process next year. This is a process we have to take on the Kuleana, and who's going to answer for this? It's going to be his grandchildren. It's going to be my grandchildren, right? They're going to look at us and go, boy, what you did was really, really good, or boy, you really screwed it up. Like I tell some of my uncles who used to catch bikinis full of fish without thinking about the next generation, right? So from a Hawaiian perspective, built into the sanctuary, it's always difficult because you have processes that are driven by Malia and Elia that are based on budgets that are 2 years, that are based on 5-year plans, 15-year plans. And the lens that we look at it is through it's a generational plan. It's several generational plans. And so we have to constantly keep that in mind. And my challenge as the director of a department that has sort of Western timeframes and milestones to meet and statutes that you have to act within makes it very, very challenging. Not to say that it's impossible. You just have to be a little bit creative in how you interpret those statutes or administrative rules. There are many ways in which the state has brought culture into the management of not only the sanctuary, but also other protected marine resources. So in the case of the Native Hawaiian Working Group, they've worked very, very hard to make the foundation a Hawaiian foundation so that we not only think about the next 2 years or the next 5 years, but think about it in terms of the next 3 or 4 generations. We have procured the services to do a cultural impact assessment, which is not part of the federal structure, but it is part of the state structure, and is part of making this pono, right? We have to know what the impacts are going to be on cultural activities and natural and cultural resources. And if you're Hawaiian, you cannot separate out what's a natural resource from a cultural resource. It's one and the same. So we have to have that assessment done. It has to be part of the process moving forward and the analysis that goes forward so that not only Native Hawaiians, but all people of Hawaii benefit from the proper analysis within the proper context to arrive at the proper solution. As a cultural practitioner myself, although some people don't believe it, marine protected areas can certainly serve as to perpetuate and improve cultural resources within its context to serve the Native Hawaiian community and all people of Hawaii, because when a process is strong and it's all encompassing, it can withstand criticism from many, many areas or many, many points of view. There are some resources that are becoming so rare now that you can only find them in protected areas. And so if the cultural protocol requires this type of species or this size of species or this species that may be in a certain state in its life history, then marine protected areas can serve the goal of perpetuating traditional and customary practices. If I cannot find a fish that I need for a makahiki ceremony in an open area because it's overfished now, but I can find it in a protected area, then that helps to perpetuate traditional and customary practices. We shouldn't have to go there. We as individuals, and I'm going to talk as an individual at this point, should have enough restraint to understand that it's not a race to the last fish in open areas. We work very well with ONMS in many, many ways. We have disagreements with ONMS on management of the sanctuary. But as partners, we strive to work together to achieve a consensus to move forward. And sometimes it's difficult, sometimes it's not difficult. It's easy to see what's pono. But like a marriage, you just got to keep going at it, right? Otherwise, if there was any, if divorce was the answer to every argument, nobody in this room would be married still yet. Correct? And contrary to what my wife thinks, she's not always right. I can talk big now, she's not here. Okay. DLNR has many, many fingers in all the processes throughout the state of Hawaii, but also within the sanctuary. We have the State Historic Preservation, which protects the traditional and customary places and practices. We have OCCL, which governs regulates the conservation lands that lie within the sanctuary. We have DOCARE that helps to enforce the regulations. We have the Division of Aquatic Resources, which hopefully will play a larger role as we go to an ecosystem-based management process, because we gotta start managing on an ecosystem-based process. Let's take a look at the Western Pacific Fisheries Management Council. They've gone from single species management to ecosystem-based management. They have ecosystem-based management plans for many of the species that occur in state waters. And we welcome their attempt to assist us, but again, we all have kuleana, so the state has kuleana for those resources. The next step in moving to an ecosystem-based management system is to include a community-based management system in that process. Because who knows what's better or what's best for the ocean in front of their house than the people that live there? Who knows what's best or better for managing those resources, because they can be Hawaiian, they can be non-Hawaiian at this point, because they have the generational knowledge for that area, and therefore what should be presumed to be the baseline data by which to measure changes that we see today. And then recognizing those changes, recognizing in those changes the responsibility to do something about it. It's not just grumbling about how good the fishing or the limu used to be in this area. It's not just about coming to DLNR and complaining about not enforcement. It is, what are we going to do about it? It's not just DLNR's or the sanctuary's kuleana to deal with it. It's everybody's kuleana to deal with it. The task is so hard, it's so large, that there is no agency that can do it by itself. So we all have to do it together. And the state is taking steps to incorporate community-based management through the Ahamoku Council process, through recognizing communities in many places throughout the state of Hawaii that have a connection to the waters and to the forest where they live, and trying to incorporate the desires of those communities for, again, we go back to leaving the ecosystem in as good a shape or better than they found it. And it should always be the second, right? Because if the generation that preceded us didn't do a good job, then that means we're behind our goals, and we have to work twice as hard. Or we have to think about it, we have to make more sacrifices in order to bring that expectation up, because we start from a place where we're behind. The ahupua'a and the management of the ahupua'a is a good place to start. But having said that, ahupua'a management occurred, management on a moku system occurred, management on an island system occurred, management at some point when Kamehameha conquered all the islands, and you Kauai people, I know you take exception to that, that's fine. Okay? But effectively, there was management throughout the archipelago, right? So it occurs at all different levels. And the recognition that it does brings the responsibility that comes with it for all of us to manage it. The ONMS brings to the state of Hawaii a lot of support in terms of access to science at a global level, science at a national level, science at an island level. We have to work at incorporating that with traditional and customary knowledge in order to have meaningful regulations, in order to have meaningful understandings, in order to have meaningful management. That's where we are today. That's where we were a year ago, and we're moving forward in trying to implement that. You know, I was driving in today, I was thinking about what's the best way to kind of make this point about everyone having to work together. And so how would Kupuna have thought about this? And because I come from a fishing background, how would somebody from 300 years ago sitting in a canoe try to explain the process? And I'm confident that they would certainly understand the process, both ecological, politically, and from a Pono standpoint of what needs to be done, but it would come from a recognition. The recognition is that it's okay to disagree. It's okay to compete. Because if you take coral, of course, as the basis of reef life, and even out to the pelagics, because if you don't have coral reef species larval heading offshore to feed the big pelagics at certain times of the years where it's critical, all of that marine environment is based upon what happens on the coral reef. But think about this. Different coral species battle every day for supremacy on the reef. That's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to survive. And the strongest survive. And that battle goes on every day, every minute, day and night. But it's in this battle that you develop the strength between all the different coral species. That strength that eventually reaches a balance amongst all the different corals growing on the reef. And that's really where we need to be. It's okay to battle. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to compete. Because when all of us are strong, when all of us are working together, that's how you achieve balance. And the only way that the sanctuary is going to work is if we all continue to battle and cooperate, because cooperation is a form of battling, to achieve the outcome to include traditional and customary thinking and values combined with Western thinking and values in moving from a single species sanctuary to an ecosystem-based sanctuary. Because that's what's Pono. That's what our ancestors did. That's what we should be doing. And with that, I think I will shut up.
That was awesome.
Thank you so much,
That was
William.
lovely.
Yeah, that's I'd like to introduce our next speaker is Uncle Walter Ritte, who wears many hats but is here today as the Molokai representative.
Battling.
Yeah, speaking of battling, on our Sanctuary Advisory Council. Thank you, Uncle Walter.
Actually, I don't wear hats. So I want to say aloha, aloha kako, aloha mai to all of you. There's a lot of people in this room today. Last time we didn't have just about half of this amount. So
We get better with age.
things are getting interesting. We're all in this room because we're here at a convention, right? And talking about conservation, we're talking about our natural resources, we're talking about our environment. So what I'd like to do is kind of like broaden the perspective away from just the whale sanctuary. I got involved in the whale sanctuary and people were going, "You're getting involved in the whale sanctuary? I mean, get a life, you know." So I got involved because I wanted to find out, you know, how does these feds work? You know, how does this system work? Because you can pound the system. I've been pounding the system from the outside for many years, developers and all that kind of stuff. So you don't really know until you get inside. I even ran for politics, tried to figure out what the hell that was all about, and got spit out real fast. So I was trying to find my niche in life. So I'm here to give you a perspective of somebody who lives in a rural area, and I want to give you a perspective from a Hawaiian point of view about all of this gatherings that's been going on over here. I was told that when this whole thing started, there was like 90% white faces, and now there's like less and less overabundance of white faces, and there's some brown faces, some Filipinos, some Japanese. I mean, it's like, the thing is getting more integrated and more integrated, so more and more people are getting to work together to try and figure out how limited are our resources, and how the hell are we going to protect these resources for the next generation. So, from my perspective, and from a Hawaiian perspective, I took some notes because I get so many things in my head. I got to figure out, okay, don't waste all your time talking about those things. Just talk about these major things over here. So, I guess the first thing we all know deep in our hearts is that our resources are in trouble. I think that's one of the reasons what brings a lot of us here. That there's something happening to our resources and it's not good. It's actually disappearing. So I see like 3 major entities out there that are looking at these resources and like a little bit saliva coming, these resources. And the worst of the bunch is, I guess I'll make a category called capitalists. You guys all understand the capitalist thing? Yeah. So that's the thing that makes all of us, be able to drive cars and buy rice and stuff like that. So the capitalist thing is the system that we all live under. So the problem with this capitalist thing is that it's so unregulated that it's becoming a detriment to the very system called democracy. So we can see it here in Hawaii really easy because our resources are so limited, we can see the impacts. So you get all these capitalists that are in Hawaii now, from GMOs to privatization, looking for PLDC stuff that the government is saying, hey, come over here, take a look at all these resources, help us make money so we can, help the people. So these capitalists are like, they're here. And throughout the whole world, they're making profits from our natural resources. And the problem with that, somebody has to pay for that. It's on the backs, and the people that are really paying for that are the indigenous peoples of this world. And in Hawaii, it's the Hawaiians. We're paying for it. That's a capitalist calling me. Hello, Dustin. How's it going over in Kauai? I'm talking to like a couple hundred people here in this room and you're giving me a call. This is an important call, gang, because this is exactly what I'm talking about, capitalists, and they're on Kauai. Dustin, I'm going to call you back, okay? Okay, aloha. That's Dustin Barca, the famous surfer and not kickboxing,
MMA.
MMA. And he's leading Kauai on his fight with the GMO, so he's a good friend of mine. Anyway, back to the capitalist. So, I'm trying to convince all of you that if you're going to pick somebody we need to fight in order to protect our environment and our resources, that's a really good target. Okay? That's a really good target. So, as a Hawaiian, I'm looking at these capitalists and I'm getting really nervous because I'm seeing everything disappear. Then, as a Hawaiian, I'm looking at all of you guys and I'm scratching my head going, I'm not too sure about these guys. I'm not too sure. Are you friend or foe? And I'm going to spend the next 4 days here, or 3 days, counting to the 4, and trying to make a decision whether or not the conservationist who has their eyes on our resources is friend or foe. We as Hawaiians need friends. We need a coalition in order to make sure that we at least balance off these capitalists that are after our resources. And if we don't come together, conservationists, how do you pronounce that word? Conservationists and Hawaiians, then I think the capitalists are going to win. That's my honest opinion. So somehow we got to come together. And right now it's kind of iffy because conservationists are coming into taking lands, and under the guise of protecting all the trees and all the plants, they're not recognizing the users that was here before all of you guys came. The practitioners and the users of these resources that we need as Hawaiians to stay alive. So these resources, you know, if I put myself in the role of a conservationist, it's like coming into a candy store of biological knowledge and like, wow, you know, look at this shell and look at this worm and this butterfly and this plant, you know, and I'm going to do a dissertation on this thing, and I'm going to come to the conference and tell everybody, look, I did this thing, can you give me another grant so I can continue this thing, and, you know, give me an award because I'm going to find this plant. And, you know, I mean, it's like a candy store for biologists and everything, you know, and that. So, fine, you know, that's the kind of guys I like to hang out with. So, not the guy that going, hey, sell that bloody thing, man. We're going to make some profit on this one. So, the Hawaiians, they see the same resource, and it's like, it's spiritual, it's cultural, it's something that I have responsibilities towards. It's something that I grew up because I learned the story of Haloa, that I need to Malama Haloa. And Haloa is the counter for all of the resources. So I have this relationship and I have this passion, and if we can understand that I've been using this resource before anybody came to make profits and anybody came to protect it, then I think maybe we can start getting together and we can do that. Because right now, you know, like I was on this I put about a year of my time, maybe a year and a half of my time into this whale thing. And we developed, and I'm still in there, they never kicked me out. So, you know, in there we tried to figure out how do we put the Hawaiian into the government, where the Hawaiians begin to use their values to actually manage the values inside there, plus the Hawaiians have a say inside this thing. How do we do that? Because government now, government and communities, they're going like this. Okay, so I'll give you an example. This is Noah, and then the other Noah thing I got involved was the seals. And I watched that process go down, the seal process. In the end of the process, people were killing the seals, not trying to protect the seals. So something is wrong with the process. The government has good intentions, but when they work with the community end up killing the seals. So something wrong with that picture. So somehow, I'm just using that as a counter, yeah? I'm talking counter over here. So we need to figure out how to fix it. So working with these guys, we've set up something like a baseline where we can actually bring the Hawaiian stuff inside there so we can begin to understand the role of the Hawaiians in Hawaii. And our role is not just to be troublemakers. That's not the role. Our role, the Hawaiians need to have a greater role. Otherwise, we're not going to make it. We ain't going to make it. Just look what's happening. Look at DLNR. I mean, he's sitting next to me, but he's like, bruh, DLNR, you guys gotta go, man. You know, I mean, I will never put the trust of my future generations in the hand of DLNR. Never. You know, I mean, I don't need the federal government to come over here and tell me there's something wrong with DLNR. I just go down the beach and I know there's something wrong with DLNR. So,
Maybe I should have put you
and this has nothing to do with my friend. He just inherited all of this stuff because the management is all screwed up. Because the management came from the universities across the water. All those guys get trained over here. They get hired over here. Duh. You know? I mean, now that okay, so I want you to know. So the goal is to work together. Whack them when they need whacking. You know? I whack him when he needs whacking. But it's not because it's his fault or whatever. It's like, hey bro, something wrong. Switch him. So that's, for me, that's the message I try to do with it. So the Hawaiian role, the Hawaiian is the ace in the hole to all of you. Okay? All you conservationists, you guys ain't got no power. Okay? Be realistic. You go to the legislature. Here comes those tree huggers again, you know? They're gonna cost us money, man. You guys got no power. Hawaiians have constitutional rights, we have legal rights, and these rights pertain to the environment. We have access rights, we have use rights. These are powerful rights that none of us are using. Because if we use these rights that the Hawaiians have, we can protect the environment. They're constitutional rights. The state doesn't use that. They don't use the Hawaiians' constitutional rights to protect the rest of you and to protect our environment. They think that the constitutional right is for a bunch of people. And we're supposed to be all one people, but no, Hawaiians are different because we have constitutional rights. Take those powers, use those powers to protect the environment because the Hawaiians will back you up politically. Because it's their rights, it's their inherent rights that was passed down generation after generation after generation. We have those rights. Instead, the state is selling out those rights. I mean, every time we gotta go to the courts, the only guys that's supporting the Hawaiians is the state Supreme Court. They keep overturning the state on water rights, on rights about our bones and our EV. Opposite's supposed to be happening. We're supposed to be using those rights to advance the protection of our environment. And that's why we're all here today. So, the process is not working. You know, on Molokai, they're going to put fences all along the mountains. And there is no prior and informed consent from the Hawaiian community. We're the majority on Molokai. There's no prior and informed consent for them to put these fences up because there was no process that allowed us to do that. The processes that are in place today does not work from a Hawaiian point of view. It's inadequate and it's placed our resources in a dire condition. So we cannot sit here and say, okay, we work with what we got. No. And we're not talking minor changes like we're doing at the federal level. We need major state changes in all of this. We're losing way faster than we're saving. So, why do the Hawaiians get so emotional with all of this? Because of our passion? It's because we have the most to lose. If you look at Article 12, Section 7, it guarantees these things to us. The prior generation worked to put these laws into place. And when these laws are not followed, we're the ones who lose. We suffer the most. So, I'm not going to talk to you about climate change and acidification and tide rises and extreme weather and all those kinds of really uppity things that make you happy every morning. Because those things are we're just part of that. And in Hawaii, we're lucky because we live in the middle of the Pacific on little dots, and we know, way before those continental guys, we know when we should be worried about losing our resources. We are ahead of the game. So I'm here today to anxiously try and convince everybody that we need a coalition of Hawaiians and conservationists. And we also need a better consultation process where the Hawaiians can actually become leaders in the realm of environmental conservation. And we need that to come from the government. We need the government to support us more than they support the capitalists. And we need our state agencies to take extreme strong positions because our environment is in trouble. There is a war being waged by the capitalists that's unregulated. And that war is being waged on our environment. And all of us need to be Aloha Aina warriors and join forces together with Hawaiians and conservationists as a beginning to protect these resources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Uncle Walter. So unfortunately, we only have a couple of minutes left, so I'm hoping our last speaker can wrap things up for us. So I'd like to introduce Malia Chow. She is the NOAA Superintendent. She's my federal partner and manages the Humpback Whale Sanctuary for NOAA. Thank you so much, Malia.
Thanks, Aaliyah. I will keep my comments brief. I wanted to sit here to remind all of you that the people on my left are the reason why we have the kind of leadership we do that's moving the sanctuary forward. When you have such strong voices, it's easy for me and Aaliyah to do our job. So let me just recall when Uncle Walter joined the advisory council. I remember his first meeting saying, I'm not here to talk. I'm here because I'm hoping this project is going to move us into action. And I think it's because of those kind of comments we are where we are today. Just really briefly, the National Marine Sanctuary System is a really small program within NOAA. We're 14 sites. We're pretty small, but we happen to have 2 out here in the Hawaiian Islands. And the opportunity to shift a single species sanctuary to one that does more things is a really exciting opportunity for Hawaii. It's an opportunity, I think, that could only occur because of what Uncle Walter and I think William's leadership and Kehalani Watson is providing us connections and a voice for communities to allow us to move forward. So I'm not going to take any more time except to remind you that what I've heard from Governor last night, and I think Chipper Wickman also reinforced this, is that Hawaii has the opportunity to be a global leader in biocultural resources. You know, we are trying to define that. Aloha Aina is not a new concept, but we have an opportunity with the sanctuaries to try to move that into action and implement it in a way that's meaningful with communities first in Hawaii. So I'm going to leave it at that. I do work for NOAA, but I wanted to follow Uncle Walter to remind him that NOAA, through the National Marine Sanctuary System, stands in a position to help realize that through the Humpback Whale Sanctuary. And Saul Kohala, I think I saw him out here. He's leading a naming working group to rename the Humpback Whale Sanctuary, and I'm really pleased to, I think at our next advisory council meeting, 3 names are coming forward that are all Hawaiian. So it's a tremendous opportunity to redo this sanctuary that's meaningful and connects to communities here in the islands. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Malia. And also, thank you for your leadership in all of this, Malia. You've really played an instrumental role. I think we may have a couple minutes for questions because we started late. So, anybody have any questions?
Yeah. Hello, my Uncle Les.
Hi, Uncle Les.
I'm the new chair for the Hahamoho for the state among all the polls, and we'll be going around the island. And this is a good time to expand our presence, working with Chairman Ida for direction, with Noah, with Walter. We're not going to throw punches. And I'm glad I came to this workshop instead of the bats. This is due respect to the conference, but I was real bored with the guest speakers this morning. I wanted to fall asleep because they didn't have the local attention. We were dealing with gas tanks, something out of the box. That's not resources, it's getting gas. And I'm not talking about gas. So I just wanted to be sure that we will need your help to work with Bill, with Walter, with Noah, and with all the guest speakers, whether for or against the monk seals. See how you know.
I'm not talking about monk seals at all today,
And so in
or
closing,
any marine animal.
please help us as we work together with our mobile. I needed to see that, Bill. I needed to see that. In Mahalo, trust is coming back again. So we need to develop trust. Thanks, Walter, for giving the gas to the capital.
God, I
Thank
can
you
guess.
for being real. All you guys, that's the kind of, we need this kind of panel that is facing reality rather than work with the bats.
Very important too.
Thank you, Uncle Les.
This is the best.
Do we have any other questions?
Right there. Yeah.
Anyway, my question is directed to Mr. Ayala.
There's a big sigh of relief that just occurred at the table.
Right? What traditional practices that you guys were talking about, you and Martha. I've been doing that all my life. And somehow, I'm getting cut short when it comes down to applying those rights. And every time we gotta go see the state before we, I guess turn people in and tell them, don't come to our place and fish. We have no right to do that. Actually, I do, as a traditional practitioner. That's my place. And I don't like people fishing in there. I'm gonna tell them, my place, traditionally, I have that right. Okay? But I know what the state will do about it, because I see one big problem with that. And you guys sitting up there talking about community-based management. And you know, the system that is in place right now does not work. And it can work with community-based management. I'm doing them already.
Okay.
It works on more time. Okay?
I'll do my best to address that. As we go forward with community-based management, of course there is the other side of the coin that talks about free navigation. There's the other side that talks about the ocean is free for all. So we're not there yet where Uncle Mac wants us to be. From a traditional standpoint, though, I agree that Uncle Mac certainly has, as a konohiki in that area, as a recognized konohiki in that area, has the ability to inform people from outside of the area what the proper behavior is in that area. The reciprocal side of that, though, is if Uncle Mac is asked as the konohiki by someone from outside of the area, is to allow someone from outside the area to come and to partake, but not at the expense of the community. And that's where the challenge is today. We have a legal system that hasn't caught up to community-based management, and it's going to take time for that legal system to be amended in such a way that community-based management and the state's affirmation of community-based management and somebody like Uncle Mac being in the role of the konohiki is recognized and balanced. And so that's not going to happen tomorrow, and it's not going to happen probably next year. It's something that's going to take a while. In 1921, I believe, the territory of Hawaii passed some statutes that required all konohikis to register their konohiki. And in 2 years, if you didn't register your konohiki, then it was lost. So in the mindset of the people who were in charge back in the 1920s of resource management, the idea was capitalists. Let's make the oceans open for all and develop some industries. And everyone in this room can agree that that didn't work, right? Does anybody in this room, please raise your hand if you think that that philosophy or that policy has worked for the betterment of resources? Okay. So the first step in recovering, if you will, from bad policy is recognition. And so we recognize that that was bad policy that was made in the 1920s. Because who better, I'm going to go back to what I was saying, who better than somebody familiar with that area, living in that area, understands generationally what used to be there, what should be there, generationally keeping track of what's being extracted, having an idea of what the baseline is, and then being able to make some management decisions about, is that the proper amount of extraction? Is it not the proper amount of extraction? So I admit, and I take the hits from Walter, because the system and the policies of the past have gotten us to a place where we have to change. I agree. We have to change. And so we're taking the steps to institute institutionally some of the things that allows us for the change to happen. At the same time, it's going to take that fisherman from Oahu who has, for about 3 or 4 generations, been able to jump on a boat and go to Mo'omomi, and not recognizing that there is this protocol in place, that this protocol will be in place, and that you have to get with it, because that's how we're going to solve the fisheries management issues that we have on Molokai. And I can tell you that the fact that somebody's jumping on a boat from Oahu to go to Molokai is a statement in and of itself, right? That means that we on Oahu didn't do a good job in taking care of our resources, otherwise we wouldn't have to go to Molokai. So Uncle Mac, I'm on board with you. I can't do it today. It takes some institutional changes. We're headed in that direction. I think for now, because legally, you can't tell somebody they can't come, but culturally you can. My advice is just do it in such a way that it's taken as taken with aloha rather than as a direct threat. It shouldn't be a direct threat, because legally they can do that for now. Uncle Mac was referring to traditional and customary practices as defined in Article 12, Section 7. Yeah, but we haven't, the legislature hasn't defined it. The last time the legislature tried to define it, I think the 2 senators that put in the legislation were burned in effigy. So it doesn't appear that we're going to get the legislature to help define it for us. So that means that the department, under my tutelage or under whoever replaces me, has to do a better job, and we recognize it, has to do a better job of interpreting the existing laws that we have to provide better leadership, better policy, clearer policy in terms of how we achieve this new harmony, if you will, recognizing that Hawaiians have a traditional and customary right to do things. Let me finish. And we have the state.
Wait, I wanted to go too. Hurry up.
The state, unfortunately, has the responsibility, if you will, to balance everybody's rights and everybody's needs. Go ahead.
Make them fast.
So, what Mac is talking about is the perfect example. Perfect example, right? The community now is saying, latest with DLNR, we're going to manage our own places, and we can do it better. And that's what he's been doing for all of his life. And he's been able to manage dead areas and bring it back to life. So everybody knows that we know he knows what he's talking about. The problem is stuck, right? Because we deal, these poor guys over here deal with the commons, right? The rights of the commons. Everybody from Oahu, this is the state of Hawaii, you can go any place you like, you can do whatever you like. And we know that what happens is we lose everything, these commons things. So what I'm saying is that in our Constitution, there's weapons, there's tools, there's spears that even the agencies can use. They can start interpreting before the legislature interprets and say, yeah, the commons have these rights, but constitutionally there's stratas. So the Hawaiians have these rights, and this is what the Hawaiians are saying. So the community have those rights. They can say it, but the agencies need to define it and to put the muscle behind people like Matt so that he can manage with some muscle. And the muscle comes from the Constitution.
Okay, before you go, let me. One more thing. See, something that's near and dear to all three of us. But I also want to make it a point that Uncle Mac, I've heard him, and so Uncle Mac has been requested to provide to the department the rules and regulations for Mo'omomi that he would like to see implemented so that there is a basis by which to tell people coming from someplace else, right, that there's a new paradigm, that you have to behave in a different manner. So under my tenure, we're taking those steps. Not moving fast enough, but we are taking those steps. So mahalo, Uncle Mac.
Okay, three quick points and then we're done. Okay, so first, for everybody who always asks me, what the hell do you do all day long, Kehal? No, you don't. This is what I do all day long. Two, so this is the policy part about what we do, because the issues that are being brought up are what we wrestle with day in and day out. And I think this is really why this management plan review process is so critical, because it is looking at things like regs and statutes and things, and how do you integrate Hawaiian traditional rights into things when we don't have federal recognition, and some people don't want federal recognition, and we have this state law and this and that. So it's a hot mess on any given day, and it's a really, really, really hard, difficult task, and which will lead to my third point. It not only requires everybody, it requires people to have relationships with each other, good relationships, because you have to be able to fight and want to punch each other in the face and then hug after and get along the next day. And nothing short of that will make this work. So when Uncle Walter says friend or foe, you're gonna have to be a little bit of both. And it's hard, it really, really is hard, but I think at the end of the day, everybody has to bring their best selves to the table, and you have to be willing to hear things you don't like, and you have to be willing to battle through them, and you have to figure out where the middle ground is, because the door is open now. And as Uncle Walter and everybody has said, our resources are in tremendous amounts of trouble, and there are very, very well-intentioned people wanting to find solutions. But if anybody thinks this is a walk in the park, I mean, we're up here and we're joking and we're cute and it's all bells and whistles and rainbows and unicorns, but it's ugly most of the time because it's really hard. And a lot of people don't want to hear that hunters need to use forest, or that Hawaiians should have priority use as cultural practitioners to certain resources over non-Hawaiians. And you know, when Interior tells you you're not recognized, or whatever the case may be, it's uncomfortable. The status quo is uncomfortable. And I get yelled at, Les has yelled at me, Mac has yelled at me, but you know what? I love them both because they still come back to the table.
So Kehal,
Yes. You can
I
yell.
don't want to be recognized.
Right.
I don't want to be recognized, and I've heard the panel say it over and over and over that we need to be recognized, or something needs to be recognized. What's wrong with resurgency?
In
Why
what
don't
way?
we shift over to resurgency?
Because there has to be, so for example, if you want to,
Why?
no, so I don't think we're talking about federal recognition in like, let's all go sign up for Kana'i Olowalu tomorrow. It's not
I
that.
don't think so.
Right, no, and I agree with that. I'm against federal recognition as well. But you have to find something that creates a place for Native Hawaiians to be a priority
Resurgency works
user.
for me.
I don't think resurgence,
Works for her.
okay, yeah.
I'm glad that it works for you. There are other people that have other opinions.
And I'm a wife,
Hmm?
so are you listening?
Of course, we listen to everybody.
Question,
But go ahead. What was the question?
Rocky.
Rocky.
Auntie Rocky.
Aloha, my name is Dr. Phyllis West. I'm a descendant from a Polynesian. My grandfather was the last Polynesian people in Awa, the religious Renata was also an attorney. My concern is our resources like everybody else here. And I think with the Ahamoku are now organized, that we can work together in instilling Hawaiian traditions within the See, one of the things the national land and natural resources should start doing is doing an audit. Audit on the commercial activities, you know, it's fine to be the businesses. But again, you know, our people have no complete closures of anything. You know, we start closing down fishing areas from different parts of the island, taking away the fish, our native rights. I believe, and my grandfather believed, and taught us about the couple system. I think maybe it's time to do a couple system, do an audit of everything, and open up. Like we did like the home. A home is almost 40 years, almost a complete closure. We have to look, audit that about opening up a couple system.
So I'm going to answer that very quickly then.
This is the last comment. I know we're way over time.
No,
Thank you
so,
for your patience.
so 2 points to that. One, the Ahamoku system is a form of recognition. It's legislation that recognizes Native Hawaiian traditional rights. Okay, but so understand that, it's complicated. 2, the Aloha Aina management document we created speaks directly to that, sustainable uses. Not simply shut down areas or create no-take zones, but how do you always have sustainable uses? That's the primary principle in it. And then also there's an entire section about the kapu system as traditional Hawaiian management. That's all, okay.
And with that, can we get a huge round of applause for our...
This is a common activity.
Thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
Consequences are like, whammo.